All right. Part 2, this is going to be 7 general principles for how best to approach your studies if you're doing this on your own. And like I said, this is exactly the same stuff we tell our students, or exactly the same things that we do in terms of how we guide our students through the process. First things first, official questions are absolutely king. I've already said it a couple times, especially for verbal. Nothing can replace an official question. I think you can get some good mileage out of quant questions that are non-official. Verbal, you've got to be really careful. And I want you to be really careful from day one. It's really, really tough once you've done every official material out there, every official verbal question, every official guide question, from every edition of the official guide, from the verbal guide, GMAT prep question pack, you're still 150 points from your goal. Now it's really, really tough to keep improving. Same idea obviously holds for the GMAT prep. There's only 6 tests. Sure, you can redo them, but then your scores are going to be inflated. And then you're not really going to be sure where you stand walking into your exam. So be careful with those. GMAT prep question pack, there's an extra couple hundred questions in there. Fantastic. Like I said, we recommend using those kind of as these fake tests if you can. So there's a decent amount of material here. If you're only going to study for 2 months or 3 months, you're fine. You can do almost exclusively official materials and be okay. But again, for those of you who might be looking at a time frame more like 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year or two, which is not unusual, unfortunately, be really, really careful with this stuff. Okay, principle number 2. And I referred to this earlier. This might be this is the biggest reason we see disappointed people who are underperforming their actual skills, especially on quant, but it's true on verbal as well. Here's the biggest thing. Hold your own feet to the fire about careless errors. So what I really want you to do is be honest with yourself. So when you do a set, let's say you sit down, you do 37 quant questions from the official guide. What a lot of people try to do is they say, they look back at the errors and they say, well, I missed 7 of these, but I understand why I missed 5 of them. Those were really silly mistakes. I'm going to focus on those other 2. Cool, focus on those other 2. There's some math you need to learn. That's great. It's those 5 I'm really worried about. Why? Nature of an adaptive test. I think most of you who are watching this right now, certainly the live audience, I think most of you already know quite a bit about the adaptive test. Plenty of resources on GMAT Club if you want to go looking around and get into more of the nitty-gritty of exactly how it works. Basically, what an adaptive test is doing, think of every question on the GMAT as having a difficulty level assigned to it. The test is trying to find the level of question at which you get roughly half right, half wrong. And because they know you can guess, it ends up being about 40% is that level of question that they're looking for, the level of question at which you get roughly 40% right. There are exceptions. If you're way up at the top of the scale or way down at the bottom, that won't be the case. But especially on quant, for most people, if you're anywhere between, let's say a 47 on your quant down to about a 27 on quant, which is going to encompass a pretty good chunk of GMAT test takers, you're going to miss in the neighborhood of 40%, give or take, on your quant section. Regardless of whether you get a 27 or a 47, obviously those are radically different scores. It doesn't really matter how many you miss, it matters which ones. You miss some easy questions at the beginning, you're going to see more easy questions. And it's going to be really, really, really hard to convince that algorithm that you deserve anything difficult. If you never see hard questions, your score will not be good. That's just how the algorithm works. So that means that in practice, missing easy questions is absolutely deadly, and I can't emphasize this enough. If you make 2 or 3 careless errors in those first handful of questions, you're in trouble. Really, anywhere in the test, if you start making careless errors, you're in trouble. So what do we need you to do? First and foremost, as you're doing quant in particular, but verbal as well, I want you to be systematic. Like right from the start, I want you to think about, hey, how do I build in systems, rhythms, techniques, habits that are going to ensure that every single time I'm doing the quant question the same way? I want you to read every question twice. Check your work every step. Check every step as you go, because you drop a negative a couple times on that test, there goes your margin for error. You can miss 2 easy questions just by saying, hey, that's easy. And the answer was -6 instead of +6. And everybody makes those mistakes. The key is, do you take the time to catch them? And again, this is going to be part of what we're going to talk about in next week's video. So really be disciplined about that right from the start. Second thing, manage your time really, really carefully. And this is a huge, huge topic. And there's tons of discussion about this on GMAT Club. On quant, don't get stubborn. Don't spend 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 8 minutes on a question. It's really remarkably easy to do. Like you'll look at something. It might be question number 3 and you go, yeah, I should know how to do this. Geometry. I studied geometry. I should know how to do this. And you get stubborn and 7 minutes go by. Can't let that happen. If you don't see a path forward, get out. Don't let yourself spend more than 3 minutes on any question. It's not worth it. Remember, unless you're way off at the top of the scale, you're going to be missing about 40% of the questions. Even if you get something like a 49 or a 50, you very well might be missing 20, 25%, even as you get way up on the scale like that. 51, you still can miss questions and get a 51 on quant. So make sure you're not getting stubborn, because if you go spend 8 minutes on one question and 4 minutes on another, you're going to feel like you're behind. You're going to start scrambling. You're going to start rushing. You're going to make those careless errors. Then your game is over. Verbal, same idea. One of the worst things I ever hear from people is, well, I don't know why my score was so much worse than my practice test. Tell me about your test experience. Well, I fell behind on verbal, but then I caught up. As soon as I hear that phrase, and then I caught up, I know exactly what happened. At that moment when they started trying to catch up, started reading sloppily, that technique fell apart. It wasn't systematic anymore. All of a sudden, careless errors, and then you're in trouble. Okay, principle number 3. What we always encourage people to do, so there's an instinct to jump to the back of the official guide and read explanations of things. Careful, don't do that just yet for a few reasons. First and foremost, those official guide explanations are, I shouldn't say they are crappy, I should say they're sometimes crappy. They are not written by the same people who wrote the questions in general. So those questions often were written 20 years before the official guides were printed. So they aren't always the best way to do a question, first of all. Second, more importantly, those explanations can't tell you where you went wrong. So the thing we really care about, especially on verbal, but it's true on quant as well, if you made a careless error, if you have a tendency to, let's say, forget about negatives when you're doing your algebra, we need you to figure that out. And the back of the book's not going to tell you that. So what I want you to do, instead of jumping to the back of the book or jumping to GMAT Club and reading those explanations right away, I want you to wash your brains. Take a day or two. Forget about the set as best you can. Wash your brains. See if you can forget about it. Come back to the question again. Go redo everything that you missed 2 days earlier and see what happens. What I'm really, really interested here isn't so much the ones that you missed twice. Those are things that you might need to study. Those might be the things where it is worth your time to go look at the explanations. You know, maybe there's some principle you're missing and you need to go back and learn some foundations of ratios or percents or sentence correction or whatever. Those are worth working on, don't get me wrong. Things I'm really interested in are the ones you get right the second time. Why? Those are technique errors. Those are things that you should have had right the first time. Look at yourself in the mirror and say, why is it that I missed those? What was the thing that caused me to goof up? What do I need to be more careful about next time? When did my focus lapse? When did my technique fall apart? When was I not systematic? Those are the most important ones. Because again, goal number 1, you've got to insulate yourself against those careless errors. So much more important than anything else I can tell you. Okay, so principle here is redo those errors first. Then if you miss them a second time, then you can go to the explanations. Principle number 4, I'm sure that any of you have participated in the forums. You see this all the time on the forums. Track everything. Keep track of everything you do meticulously. Here's a link to some error logs. Plenty of different templates out there. Most test prep companies offer some up. Plenty of people on GMAT Club have offered them up. Here's a thread that's going to give you a few different options. One thing you might want to think about in particular, keep track of those careless errors. See if you're seeing improvement in them over time. Also, I really want you to include the times you spend on each set. So if you see improvement in, let's say, critical reasoning or reading comprehension, that's one of the areas where a lot of people get really, really, really nervous about the time and go, I'm so slow at critical reasoning, I'm so slow at reading comprehension. And let's say that you're one of those poor souls that might need to study those things for months, maybe a year even. Yeah, it's going to be really, really valuable to you in your 6th month of prep when you say, hey, when I did my first set of reading comprehension, I did 25 questions and it took me 75 minutes. Now look at this. It's taken me 45. That's so valuable to see that progress, especially if you start to get discouraged. Everybody has bad days. If you have everything tracked in a really neat, clean way, it's a fantastic way for you to be able to say, hey, there's improvement here. Or wait a minute, I used to know how to do exponents, and now all of a sudden 2 months later, I did worse on this set. That data is so priceless. Keep track of the dates you did everything, the time you spent on everything. Principle number 5, no binging. I mean that in 2 different ways, and I think they're probably equally important. In the first way I mean with no binging is I don't want you to binge too much in terms of how much you study. What we recommend to our students, so assuming that people are working 40 hours a week or 45 hours a week in a nice normal job, which of course is not the case for everybody. Something like 2 hours per weekday is about right. Maybe 3 or 4 hours per weekend day, something like that. It's going to get you to about 15, 18 hours a week. Why that much? Well, first of all, if you're doing less than that, you probably won't get the exposure to all of the glorious variety of the GMAT as much as you'd like. So if you do much less than that, your progress is going to be fairly slow. Here's the problem. If you do more than that, what's going to happen in hour number 5, hour number 6, hour number 18 on Saturday when you try to just study like crazy? You're going to start making those careless errors. Don't let that happen to you. So don't binge in that sense. Also, don't binge on certain question types. So one of the things I see people do sometimes, they'll do quant one month and then verbal the next. By the end of that month of verbal, they've forgotten their quant. And I think it's really, really unhealthy to do, let's say critical reasoning or reading comprehension are your biggest weaknesses. And let's say that in your second month, you decide you're just going to go all out on verbal. So you're going to spend 15, 18 hours a week doing verbal, and you know that you're worse at critical reasoning or reading comp. So 12 of those hours are critical reasoning or reading comp. You're going to drive yourself nuts. That is excruciating. It's going to be really hard to improve. You're going to burn out. So don't binge on topics. Focus on your biggest areas of weakness, absolutely, but don't do it completely at the expense of other things. So it's very, very rare that we meet anybody who should be doing just quant or just verbal, unless you're perfect at one or the other, which is very, very rare. Chances are you need some balance in terms of the question type. So be really, really thoughtful about how to keep some balance in terms of the types of questions you're doing. Don't do too much on a single day. And just as importantly, don't let your life become unbalanced. This is another thing we see all the time in some of those more anguished share your GMAT experience posts on GMAT Club. I quit my job. I broke up with my girlfriend. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. I haven't spoken to my family. I haven't exercised. I'm sleeping 4 hours a night because I'm studying 20 hours a day. Yeah, that doesn't end well. It never ends well. Make sure you keep balanced. What's important to cognitive function? Sleep, exercise, having a social life, being basically a happy person. Make sure those things are still in your life. So if you do more than about 15, 18 hours a week, or much more than that, depending on your appetite for studying, all those other things start to become unbalanced. Mountains and mountains of research will back me up on this. Sleep in particular, but everything, diet, exercise, being balanced in other ways, having a social life. Those are all things that will improve your cognitive function. At the end of the day, this is a test where we need you sharp for 4 hours, sharp, sharp, sharp. If you get burnt out because you're not sleeping and you're studying too much, it's not going to work out. So keep balanced. 15 hours a week, 18 hours a week. Don't go too crazy and do too much more than that, because then you risk just getting burnt out and your performance is going to decline. So make sure you're keeping your life balanced. If that means it takes you a few more months of prep, great. It's going to be worth it in the end, I promise. All right, principle number 6. So one of maybe the greatest thing about GMAT Club, so obviously, we've got mountains and mountains of resources. Virtually anything that any tutor or test prep company can tell you is available in some form for free on GMAT Club. And once again, I think I've just talked myself out of having a job. But I think the even better thing than all those resources and all that content and all those practice tests, I think is just the community and the ability to see people who've been down the same road you have, especially if you're struggling on this test. If you're one of those hard gainers, and again, this entire presentation is dedicated to you guys who are looking for 100 points plus, and this is going to be hard for you. Take a look at some of these debriefs. Spend some time in that shared GMAT experience section. You're going to see some people that are unhappy, and it's not fun to see people who are suffering, but you're not alone. People form study groups, people meet study buddies, all sorts of wonderful connections happen. The 4 debriefs I featured in here, these are 4 of my very, very favorites. Why? These are 4 people who achieved just incredible, incredible things. So we have somebody who started at a 420, got to a 700, got an HBS. It took him years, and his debrief is fantastic. And this is an older one. This is from quite a few years ago. There's a fellow who went from 350 to 700. He worked really, really hard for it. It was not easy. Somebody else, verbal score jumped by almost 20 points. And some fellow named Shovik, took him 4 years to get a 760. So these are people who I think really exemplify what really happens to people who achieve these gigantic score improvements. So sure, you'll run into the occasional person who manages to gain 200, 300 points really, really quickly. They exist. They're exceedingly rare. These are the real stories, and there's tons of them on GMAT Club. Stay inspired. Stay honest about what this really is. Again, the GMAT the GMAT data says that the average person who retakes the test only improves by about 30 points. Yeah, and that makes perfect sense. It's not to say that you can't improve by 200, 300 points. Some of these folks did. But look at their stories. They had to work so hard, so diligently, so thoughtfully. In some cases, they got quite a bit of help from the community. These are the real stories. Take a look at these, especially when you get down, you get tired. Take a look at some of these guys. And there's plenty more where these came from. One quick thing I'll say about the way the people who design standardized testing think. They love to say, yeah, we've designed a test that is uncoachable, meaning that you can't get test prep coaching and expect improvement. The GMAT's very, very proud of the fact, they don't say this publicly. When I've met GMAT psychometricians, they've actually said, yeah, we do all these things to ensure that coaching won't really work. It's not to say that improving your skills won't work. Improving your skills will definitely work. There's not going to be tricks and little tips and little gimmicks that are going to get you very far. It's going to be tough. The test is designed to be as unpreppable as possible. Be prepared for that. Again, some of you guys are going to study for a few weeks and knock the cover off this thing, and that's fantastic. For some of you who are really, really struggling, you can do it. Again, check out those debriefs from those four folks who achieved just unbelievable things. Took them a long time. That's the normal experience. Okay, so principle number 7. And this is our final thing for today. I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of the other things we have on GMAT Club. I really want you, principle number 7 really is I want you to maximize your use of the forum. So in general, here's some resources. So one of our, I think he's an admin or a moderator now, fantastic fellow named Abhimana is his handle on the forum, wrote this great post about how to best maximize resources on GMAT Club and kind of runs through all the things that helped him, some of the tools that are on the site. One of the things he really emphasizes is you can follow threads, you can follow entire sections of the forum, and you can follow particular individuals. So for example, if you really need some help on quant, Buñuel, who's an absolute genius on the forum, constantly answers everything immediately. You might want to follow him. Verbal, there are 4 or 5 of us who are pretty active on the Verbal forums. Hit that follow button underneath our profiles. And then there's a follow feed that you can click on, and you'll see all of our posts whenever you want. I think participation really helps. And one thing you'll see out of a lot of those folks who achieved those gigantic improvements over time when it was really tough for them, a lot of them did really participate in the forums. The cliche that teachers love to spit out is this idea that one person teaches, 2 people learn. And I think it's very true. And I can speak from a little bit of experience on this. I've only been super active on GMAT Club for a little bit less than a year. I've been teaching test prep for about 17 years. Every time I try to write an explanation of something, I learn something about this test. There are additions to the official guide I could probably recite to you. Then when somebody asks me a question, I have to phrase it well. I realize some little thing, or my depth of understanding of that grammar rule or that logical principle becomes deeper. It'll be the same thing for you. Invest some of your time, if you have it, put some time into writing explanations, answer questions, post what you think the best solution is to a question. It's going to help crystallize how you think about the test. And again, especially if you're really struggling, writing up some of those explanations, participating, having dialogues with other members really can help you solidify how to think about the test. We've got a great question of the day series. So every weekday, there's both a quant and a verbal question of the day. So there's an RSS feed there, so you can subscribe there. And there's also a link to all of the previous questions of the day. So subscribe to that. You'll get 2 questions in your inbox every weekday. All right, last thing. One other thing, we're just really getting into this on GMAT Club. Videos, so we did a series of 10 verbal videos last year. Admittedly, they're a little bit rough around the edges. Again, everything we're doing is live. So we're kind of still banging out some of those glitches in it. Take a look at those verbal videos if you need help. Most of them are sentence correction. A couple of them get into critical reasoning. Not a comprehensive series, but if you like to get your GMAT content in YouTube form, take a look at that link. All of the links to the other videos are there.
We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more informative content.